Hi everyone, I'm Abhinav Prateek, and today we are going to talk about redesigning an existing product. I've been a product manager and have almost 8 years of experience across multiple domains. I had completed my undergrad in mechanical engineering from Indian Institute of Technology Kanpur back in India in 2012. Post that, I had joined a consumer goods company called ITC in India, when I was focused on building perfume-based products. However, after doing that for almost a couple of years, I wanted to take the plunge and start up in the waste management space. Avshesh was primarily focused on building a waste management platform for connecting waste sellers to waste buyers. However, in a couple of years, we realized that this was not the right time for the idea to succeed, and we had to shut down our startup. I then jumped back to the corporate world, working at Urban Company, which is a company very similar to Thumbtack in the United States. I then came to the United States in 2016 August to pursue my master's in business administration at the Wharton School. While I was able to hone my business skills, at the same time, I also took multiple courses in business analytics to learn more about machine learning and statistical techniques. While at Wharton, I interned at Grubhub when I was focused on building a product feature to help consumers discover new dishes. Completing my master's in business administration, I really wanted to try out a machine learning based product. And that is what made me join the forecasting team at Walmart, which was focused on solving the forecasting problem for Walmart. It is during this time period that I actually went about redesigning the existing forecasting UI UX, which was being used by the internal users, and which is the main topic for today's discussion. Earlier this year, I wanted to get back into the consumer product space to broaden my skill sets, and that is why I joined Uber, when I'm focused on improving the driver experience. Taking a step back, let me help you understand a bit more about the context that I was working in. If you think about Walmart, Walmart is a global company which sells multiple products across all of its stores. But behind it, there's a very intricate and complex supply chain system which exists, which ensures that the right product reaches the right store at the right point of time. And forecasting sits at the head of that replenishment system. You can assume that the forecasting problem is as simply as predicting how many bananas am I going to sell in a particular Walmart store in a particular week. And you could scale that across Walmart stores globally, as well as across thousands of items which sell at Walmart. There were two main focus areas for me while I was working at Walmart. One was the core product experience, the UI UX, which the internal demand managers would use so that they could visualize the forecast for different items, as well as manage those forecasts if required. And the second work stream that I was primarily focused on was the machine learning aspect of it to help solve the forecasting problem. When we used to use supervised learning to predict demand at different Walmart stores at different points of time in the future. If you think about the product journey, generally a product starts with a certain set of design framework to solve for existing and potential use cases in the future. However, with time, this framework starts getting pushed to the limit as new use cases keep getting added on. And then there comes an inflection point when you have to take a pause and think, is my framework sufficient enough to manage all the existing new use cases, which might actually end up leading to a divergent experience and is not optimized for our users? Or do we need to take a step back and think holistically about all the use cases and potential future use cases and potentially think about redesigning our application? And this is exactly the point at which we were in our forecasting journey almost a year and a half back. We were seeing a lot of limitations in the existing product to scale up to new requirements. To add features, we had already diverged from the existing frameworks of the product, which was leading to suboptimal user flows and information architecture. It was very important for us to keep the goals in our mind very clear so that we could solve for the right things. There were three main goals which we were targeting for. One was ensuring a consistent user experience across the entire product journey and ensuring that the user flows were very simple and intuitive for the users. Secondly, we wanted to optimize the task flows so that it would be optimally efficient for the users to complete the task that they wanted to do. And thirdly, we wanted to build a platform for the future which could scale very easily for potential upcoming new use cases, and of course, solve for the existing use cases as well. We adopted a 5-step process for redesigning the website. We first tried to understand the existing flow. We coupled that with more in-depth user research to gather more data. We then got into the design phase and solutioning phase, when we were thinking about what solutions we should use to solve the problems that we were able to discover. We then wanted to iterate fairly quickly with our design so that we could land on something which were really solving the problems. And then was the implementation phase, wherein we had to get into discussions with engineering and make trade-off discussions before we could make the product live. I'm going to deep dive into all of these steps individually now. So the first task was being able to map out all the existing flows which existed and try to identify suboptimal use cases which existed. We used a popular tool called Lucidchart to be able to map it out. And as you can see here, this is a representative diagram of all the user flows which existed. Looking at the user flow diagram and partnering with my design partner, we were able to identify a few of the user flows which were broken and were suboptimal. For illustration purposes, those are marked in red. The next step and the most crucial step in this process was user research, which was really gunned at understanding what were the pain points that the user was facing and how were they actually using our product currently. It was very important for us to well define the goals that we had in mind for the user research study. For this, we also partnered with a user researcher who was a part of the Walmart team. There are 5 main goals that we had in mind. The first one was we just wanted to learn more about how was a current product being used. Because a lot of times it's possible that we build features and product with a certain use case in mind, but then over time, the utility of it evolves and the users find new use cases for it and new ways to use that feature. The second thing which we wanted to understand was what was it that the users really liked about the product and what were functionalities which were critical, which could just not be taken away. The third thing which we wanted to look at was, were there external products that these users were using to solve use cases which we could potentially have solved through our product itself? Fourthly, of course, we wanted to understand any pain points and frustrations which existed in the current user journey. And then fifthly, and more broadly, was what were the existing unmet user needs which existed? And just to clarify between points 4 and 5, 4 was more focused on understanding the pain points in the existing product from a user journey standpoint. So with respect to existing features, were there really things which are not optimal? And the fifth was to understand were there additional features which we really wanted to build in to help solve for all the use cases that the users really required. While conducting the user research, one of the important things we wanted to keep in mind was that the forecasting product was really a global product. So we wanted to ensure that we could get a good representation from different countries. And in this case, it was United States, which was the main customer, but then Canada, Mexico, and UK market as well. We had a good sampling of users to conduct the user research. And then we worked with a user researcher to be able to define the different questions and audit those questions to ensure that we could get the answers that we wanted to. Another thing to keep in mind while designing a user research study is to always start from broad and then go to narrow, so that you don't narrow down the perspective of the users and you're able to really glean through information which you would not have ideally if you had very well-directed questions. And that is the approach that we took. We started with very broad. So we just wanted to understand how the users are currently using the platform, because there were a lot of issues which we could observe by looking at those videos, versus a lot of times the users get used to it and they don't really think of that as a problem, and they just think of that as a feature and not a bug. We almost gathered 16 hours worth of video to look at to identify these problems and the main objectives that I had highlighted on the previous slide. To analyze the data, we utilized a methodology called affinity diagrams, wherein, as you can see again for illustration, we had different users listed in different columns, and in different rows, we listed different dimensions, which are along what is the user really wanting from the product. What does the user like? What does the user not like? How is the user interacting with different charts which were present in the product? And what makes the user trust the forecast? Because the users were using a product before the forecasting product was launched. And we wanted to understand what are those trust factors so that we could start building upon those further as principles. After looking at the videos in a very detailed manner, we were able to plot all of these data into this 2x2 metrics for each user. From the affinity diagrams, we tried to build out a mind map so that we could consolidate a lot of the learnings. And we were able to come up with a consolidated list of what were features that were really missing, or what were things that the users really liked about the platform. So for example, one of the things that the users really liked was being able to see the predictions, the forward-looking predictions, as well as what the sales patterns were for last year, so that they had some intuition as to how the demand was going to grow, and they could validate that these forecasts look fine. And that was a feature that was launched when the forecasting product had come into existence for the first time. So similarly, we just wanted to understand what were the other aspects of the product that they really liked. This is a summary of the insights that we were able to glean. Again, this is for illustration, and it does not include everything. It just talks about a few ideas at a very high level. So for example, in one of the dislikes which came out was the chart was not very readable and did not contain all relevant information. Similarly, we learned that they were a lot of times ending up using external tools, such as they had a bunch of SQL queries written down, or they were using separate Excel sheets for reporting purposes. And those are things which we could very easily incorporate into the platform itself, so that we could make their lives much, much easier. And we also identified several opportunities for us to grow more in. So for example, one opportunity which came through was exception management, which implies if we could help them identify forecasting exceptions. So for example, generally an item sells around 100 units in a store, but the forecast for some reason is 200 or 250, which seems like an exception. So if you could help them with such exceptions, which they could then review, it would really help them, because given the scale of Walmart, it's just not possible for them to be able to review the forecast for all store items. The next step was a very critical step, because this is where we wanted to get the design right and wanted to get to the solution phase of the problems that we had highlighted, or that we were able to identify through our earlier user research studies. It was very important for us to align upon the product principles so that it could really aid us in our decision making and we could maintain a clear thought process in terms of what was it that we really wanted to get out of this. There are three main product principles that we aligned on. One was we wanted to be very transparent about the forecast data that we were publishing, and we wanted to make it very easy for our users to look at that forecast data and be able to bisect and dissect it at different levels possible. Just to give an example, for example, how many bananas are we predicting we'll sell in a particular state? Not just at a store, but maybe in a particular state. Or how many bananas are we expecting that a DC might need to fulfill? So being able to provide that visibility and transparency was very important. Secondly, we wanted to build a very flexible system which could support future use cases. So we wanted to build a framework which could keep that in mind. And thirdly, we wanted to really do away with all complex flows and make the flow and user journey as simple and intuitive as possible. Based on these product principles and based on user research, post which we had a long list of features and item list to work on, we were able to prioritize the feature list that we wanted to work with. Also, given that this was redesigning an existing product, There was a base requirement that we needed to meet before we could build up on top of it. And then thirdly, once we were very clear on what the product principles and the priority list of features were, I partnered very closely with the designers so that we could brainstorm on different solutions to solve those problems in a very in a creative way, and to come up with the first version. However, as you all are aware, in the product manager's journey or in the product development lifecycle, you probably wouldn't come up with the right solution in the first attempt itself. And you definitely want to go back to your users to understand whether that really solves the problem that you are intending to solve. To enable this process, I partnered with the design partner to build working mockups so that we could again observe very closely how was the user interacting with the mockup and whether it was intuitive enough without us really having to teach or educate them on what the purpose of different features were. And we had certain well-directed questions so that we could also encourage them to use certain features which they might not have used in the initial explorations. Again, we wanted to be very clear on what was it that we really wanted to test and what was the objective or the goal of the exercise that we are wanting to get to. And thirdly, we wanted to again get a good sampling of different users across different countries, just to ensure that we were able to incorporate all cultural differences as well as business differences of different businesses. Through the usability testing, we were able to gather very good feedback on certain fallacies in our designs. Mostly it seemed like we were headed in the right direction, but still needed some improvements. We were then able to iterate pretty quickly to address the pain points, and we conducted a second round of usability tests to help us zoom down on the final designs that we wanted to go ahead with. Once we had finalized the designs, that is when I was able to get to the requirement stage and get into discussions with engineering to be able to discuss what does it take to implement the requirements that we had come up with, and the kind of timelines that we're looking at to be able to make a trade-off discussion on which features it was fine to probably push off to a later version versus which features were really a make or break, and we would want to invest quality time in it. Post multiple discussions, we were able to align on that. One more aspect of an internal product which I'll call out is, since the users are internal, it's very easy to reach out to them and understand their pain points. But it's also very important to gain their alignment because they are our primary stakeholders. So we also ended up doing a bunch of meetings and roadshows with our primary stakeholders to show them the designs that we had aligned upon and whether from a broader standpoint they saw any challenges that could potentially arise and whether that was a good path to go ahead with. Finally, we were able to launch the redesigned product almost after a year and a half worth of effort. And we got some very good feedback. And our primary users were very, very excited with the changes that we had launched and the user journeys that we were able to enable and the kind of optimizations that we had ended upon. The three main takeaways that I would want to focus on. One is it's very important to clearly define what the goal of the end-to-end journey is, and also be able to come up with product principles because they really help in decision making whenever there's a disagreement between different aspects. It's always also a very good idea to probably go back to the users if there's a standstill and you all are not able to come up to a conclusion. Secondly, in such situations, it's very important to partner with your design partner very early on in the experience so that you ensure that you all are able to collaboratively solve the user problems that exist. And thirdly, redesigning an application is very different than just adding a new feature. Because when you think about redesigning an application, there's already a certain defined minimum viable product. You cannot launch a product which does not meet those requirements. And you just need to add on top of it versus being able to subtract. That is very different than adding a new feature wherein there's no predefined expectations because there's no predefined feature which already exists probably. those are the three main takeaways that I would want to focus on. Thanks a lot.